So, Peter Blexley, pretty extraordinary article in The Guardian today saying that two very senior positions in the police, one, let me get this correct, the Deputy Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, of course here in London, and the Chief Constable of Merseyside Police, both of those jobs with six-figure salaries, attracting one applicant each. That is absolutely extraordinary. Of course, you've got experience in the police and we'll talk about that, but I just wanted to get your impression, first of all, of why it is that jobs at the top of the police are getting absolutely no attention whatsoever. Is there a massive brain drain here that we're not addressing?
Unfortunately, due to years of willful neglect, the talent pool at the top of British policing is so shallow you could barely dip your toes into it. There just isn't suitably qualified, experienced, motivational kind of leaders to fill these roles. And so people are not going to embarrass themselves by coming up short during the process, and consequently, they're not applying.
So how do we fix that, though? I mean, this is a huge problem, right? Crime is going up. It's one of the most important issues for voters. And if no one's willing to, or no one good enough is willing to throw their hat in the ring, I don't see how we fix this. What would you do about it?
Andy Marsh, the head of the College of Policing, in itself a lamentable organisation, which is to blame for so many of policing's ills.
Right, well, we'll come back to that, yeah.
Has admitted that there's a lack of talent. But guess what? Oh, yes, he's rolled out that word again, reforms. They're making reforms, and in time they will deliver. And of course, why is it that people like the College of Policing and the National Police Chiefs Council always talk about the reforms that they're making or undertaking? Why can't they just do their job and get it right in the first place?
Yeah, so obviously you have a lot of experience within the police. Can you just talk us through a little bit about what it's like on the inside of one of these big organisations, right? So what is the fundamental problem inside? Let's take the Met for it. Did you work within the Met? Where did your career take you?
The Met was my employer,
yeah.
But I travelled the length and breadth of the country and further afield when I was working within my specialist department.
Yeah.
But and of course, it's a long time since I was in the policing world, but I'm extremely well connected through a reliable network of sources that keep me up to speed. And only a few months ago, I was on the front line of policing for a few days with Bedfordshire Police. So I've got a reasonably good idea of what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But in answer to your question, ever since way back in the run-up to the 1997 general election, Tony Blair said, education, education, education. Now, some ambitious police officers who wanted to climb further up that greasy pole thought to themselves, we'll have a piece of this. And what they did at taxpayer expense was took themselves off to university, where they got their glittering, shiny degrees, letters after their names, and quite frankly, many of them became indoctrinated with pseudo-intellectual claptrap that has no relevance to frontline policing. But this laid out the pathway for all senior police officers. So they've all got their degrees now, when quite frankly, most of them got away from frontline policing as soon as they possibly could because they didn't like the rough and tumble of it. And they lack the experience, the connection with the public and with victims of crime. And they've also allowed their organisations, in many examples, to become the shambolic shadow of their previous selves.
Using the internet without a VPN, a virtual private network, is a bit like taking to the road without car insurance. All it takes is one unlucky moment to cost you a lot of cash. This video's sponsor is Private Internet Access. They are the VPN to help keep you safe. Click the link in the description below to find out why over 30 million people have downloaded PIA to protect themselves online. A virtual private network is an app that hides your IP address and helps keep your data private. When you're browsing the internet at home, you give up a large amount of data to businesses, to shops, and indeed to social media giants too. Hackers have the ability to steal your personal data with ease, including sensitive information such as passwords, keystrokes, and even your personal photos. Private internet access helps protect your personal data by encrypting your internet connection to keep your data out of the hands of cyber criminals. And it's not just hackers either to be concerned about. Information can be censored too. When Canada passed their C-18 bill, social media giants decided to ban news content on their platforms. But PIA can protect your ability to consume the news and content you love. Private internet access is available for Windows users, Mac OS, Android, Linux, iOS, and you can use one PIA subscription to protect an unlimited amount of devices. And we've got a huge GB News discount for you too. Click the link in this video's description and you'll get a massive 83% off PIA. That's under £2 a month, the price of a coffee, and you'll get an extra 4 months completely free on top. Also, there's a 30-day money-back guarantee too. Visit piavpn.com/GB News to start protecting yourself digitally today.
So a big problem you would say is what, pen pushing, bureaucracy, not really interested in solving crime, which I'm sure you and I would agree is the whole point of a police force, is protecting and serving the community, right? So that being the case, what I don't quite understand about this is, even if that's true, say, you know, there's a lot of bureaucracy here and there's a lot of people interested in climbing the greasy pole. This story in particular, you would think there would still be a few not very good candidates potentially. You think there'd be a few more candidates who just want that salary, but this is attracting 200 grand a year, and yet still there's nobody going for it. So there seems a bit of a mismatch there. Can you make sense of that?
Well, to answer a number of questions here, if I may, and let me point out first and foremost, with regards to the policing's responsibility, is Sir Robert Peel, 200 years ago or thereabouts, said the police effectiveness will be judged by a lack of crime, because preventing crime is what the police should do. Well, how effective are our police these days with crime absolutely everywhere, unfortunately? The next point, policing has become, because they're all university types, it's in the grip of academia. They see themselves as above the likes of you and I, members of the public, victims of crime, because they're the academics, they know how to do it, they know best. When fundamentally the crime statistics would show you, and the public attitudes, that they don't know how to do policing best, actually, because in many parts of the country, it's an absolute shambles.
Yeah. And
something quite dramatic needs to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. So what would that look like to you? I mean, how do we get back to basics on this?
Break that grip of academia. Take police services away from being a social service, and once again make them crime-fighting organisations. Strip away the nonsense. Get back to the 9 principles that Sir Robert Peel wrote back in 1829, and they can easily be found online, by the way. Don't look at the modernised versions that some chief constable who's been to university has written. Look at Sir Robert Peel's original 9 principles of policing, because I say they are as apt and as relevant today as they were then. And if our police services adhered to them more closely, we'd probably have a bit more time and respect for our police officers.
Yeah, yeah. Do you think we need more police officers, or does the existing force, the existing numbers, just need to do their job slightly differently? Or maybe it's both.
Talk's cheap, policing's expensive. Now, police always want more officers, but those officers have got to be doing the things that the public want. And what do you say? It's patrolling the streets, thereby providing reassurance, more than likely preventing crime, and being there for communities, being known to communities, being visible. That reassurance means so much to the public. But of course, you see, the academic bosses trashed all that a long time ago because they couldn't measure the effectiveness on their spreadsheets. And superintendents only become chief superintendents if they're very good at spreadsheets. Police officers patrolling the street also need to be able to respond to the needs of victims of crime, investigate crime properly, professionally, thoroughly, in the very first instance. Because the one big impression I got from being on the front line with cops not so long ago is that they are firefighting.
Yeah.
They're going from one call to another call to another call. And at each and every occasion, they're just putting sticking plasters on very unsatisfactory sets of circumstances. They're not gripping these things. They're not dealing with them properly. And when you do that, you deal with them by and large once and for all.
Do you think crime has been effectively decriminalised in large parts of the country? Let's take London, for example. That's where I live, so I'm personal perspective on this. Do you think certain parts of London, the reason it's so bad is criminals just don't think they're even going to bother being, no one's going to talk to them in the first place, the police just aren't there?
Yeah, there's not the deterrence there, you see.
Yeah.
Once again, if I go back to that police officer on the street, say somebody's going shoplifting and millions of people are. They walk into a store, they steal with impunity. What's the likelihood of them running out of the shop and bumping into a police officer? No, doesn't exist. It used to back in my day. So there's no deterrent there. So many stores these days instruct their staff and their security teams to have a non-intervention policy because they're afraid they might get hurt. Well, if they trained them better, then they could intervene. So there's no deterrent there. And of course, our courts hand down lamentable sentences, which are so lenient if anybody actually does get to court for shoplifting. So there just aren't deterrents. You know, the likelihood of getting caught is and should be a deterrent. But too many people are committing too much crime and simply getting away with it.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So is part of the deterrent, or what's the bigger part of deterrence here? Knowing that you will get caught, or thinking you'll get caught, or the length of sentence? In other words, if you think there's a 90% chance you'll get 6 months, is that a greater deterrent than a 5% chance you'll get 3 years? Do you see what I'm saying? Do we actually want to focus on preventative measures more so?
You can't have one without the other, of course.
Right,
so
they
come together. They're natural bedfellows. And if you're not going to get caught, then you're not going to get sentenced. But unfortunately, every aspect of our criminal justice system is in crisis. If we take policing at the front line, then we go to the Crown Prosecution Service, underfunded, some lamentable standards and levels of staff within that body. The courts, we know the buildings are crumbling. There's a massive backlog. There's insufficient IT. They're in a dreadful mess. Then we go to the prisons, overcrowded, no space, people being let out early, inhumane conditions and a lack of discipline, and prison staff who are not properly trained, properly rewarded, and have got the equipment to keep them safe. And then lastly, we go to probation. And I think many of us know just how poorly the probation services are performing these days, often with overworked staff who consequently become demotivated and don't do their job properly. And that in turn puts all us at risk. So the whole criminal justice system is in crisis. It needs to be looked at in the round, so to speak, and gripped and made better and fit for purpose.
Do you think this is the worst it's been in your career? Are we on a general downward slope here?
It is. It's by far the worst it has ever been in all the years that I was in the police and that I've been commenting, writing and broadcasting about policing subsequently. It's absolutely catastrophic. And unfortunately, to me, it just seems to be part of this inevitable decline that our once great nation is sadly on.
Yeah, and once people think there's no chance of a crime being solved, or so it just, you know, the criminals, it benefits them, and all the law-abiding people that want to try and leave the country entirely. It's a bit of a mess, isn't it? Very briefly, finally, I just want to ask about prisons, actually, because you mentioned that as part of, in the round solving this problem. We know they're overcrowded. We know the government have been releasing people early. As a general principle, what do you think the role of a prison is? Is it to rehabilitate, or is it to keep criminals off the streets? And does that actually make a difference in how you run a prison, depending on your view on that?
Punishment without rehabilitation is a complete and utter waste of time. Now, of course, some people, like Axel Rudabakana, are beyond the pale and will never taste freedom again. So I don't really give a damn about him. I'm not in the slightest bit concerned about rehabilitating him, other than that I don't want him to carry out some dreadful act upon prison staff.
Yeah, but for the petty criminals and so on,
Indeed, general criminals who might receive any form of sentence need to be rehabilitated so that they can come back into society and function as contributing members of society, and not people who merely take. But yet again, it's expensive. Some of the costs could be cut, because I'm sure there are many people who are retired, former teachers, police officers, other people from whatever sector they've been from, who would like to go into prisons and would teach prisoners literacy, numeracy, vocational skills, and the such like. At the moment, we've got a bit of a sausage machine that sends criminals in at one end and turns out better educated and better criminally connected criminals at the other end. And that really is a system that manifestly is failing us all.
So do the gangs control certain prisons now? I see stories saying as such. Is that a concern you have as well?
Fundamentalist Islamic gangs, yes. They rule the roost in many prisons. And of course, we've seen their dreadful handiwork in recent times, which is utterly appalling. There's always been an element of gangs and gang culture in prisons, because when you're there, you want somebody that's going to cover your back. But it's a rather more modern phenomenon, the Islamist gangs who want to spread their poison, indoctrinate young and vulnerable minds, and get them over to their way of thinking. So everything must be done in order to try and prevent that.
How do you do that, though? It sounds not just expensive, but also logistically.
Well,
go ahead.
Who's no stranger to GB News, called Ian Aitchison, came up with a strategy for that: separation units, whereby those who spread the fundamentalism would be held separate so that they couldn't influence other prisoners. But sadly, those units have subsequently been used not in the manner in which he designed them, and they've become some kind of safe haven for these dreadful people, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, Peter Bleksley, thank you very much for joining us. It doesn't sound like particularly good news in the round here, but it's very interesting to talk to you about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.